It's time for another edition of the Improbability Engine. I'm Will Aubrey here with my buddy Joe Darnell. And Joe, as always, we start with our moment of what?
Yeah, and right before I get started with that one, I do want to say a happy Improbability Engine birthday to Ed Marlowe of the Murray Ledger Times, one-time guest, all-time friend. If you see him, tell him how old he is, how old he looks. All right, my moment of what? Dateline, Augusta, Maine. A Maine man was frustrated by his interaction with a city employee, and so he decides he's going to throw bed bugs at him. An Augusta, Maine man threw bed bugs at a city employee because he didn't qualify for government assistance. It's possibly one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. Assault by bedbug. The city office did shut down.
Because of bed bugs?
The thing with bedbugs is, once they get a foothold, it costs thousands to get rid of them. So the trick is just get rid of them soon. Kind of one of the weirder and more gross things that I've ever heard.
You know, that would make an interesting mascot for a sports team, like the Augusta Bedbugs.
It definitely worked for a minor league baseball team.
Yeah. My moment of what? My grandchildren, well, some of my grandchildren were in town yesterday, and so I'm riding in a car being driven by my grandson, Grant, who's 15. And evidently, where he lives, you can get a permit when you're 15.
Right.
When I was a kid, you could not get a permit when you were 15. But just being in a car driven by my grandson caused me to go, what? Wait a minute. How am I this old?
You know, Will, I can understand that. And then I look up and I see you. And I realize, no, he's that old. That's how that works.
Today, I want to talk about the greatest games in Murray State history.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about basketball, just to be clear.
Just to be clear. Although there have been some great, football games, there have been some great baseball games, and so on and so forth. We are just talking about men's basketball here.
We're talking about basketball.
Oh, you're switching it up on me. I see how it works.
We have one. I'm going to mention one women's basketball
game. Okay, not a problem. All right. Well, let me start it off then, because I want to get to this game first and foremost. It was one of the high marks of my time following Murray State basketball. It was an incredible game. It wasn't a barn burner of a game, but it was played by really good players on both sides, and it was the St. Mary's basketball game, bracket buster, when all of ESPN seemed to descend upon Murray State University, and Murray State fans did not disappoint, as all of them descended upon the bank and watched a heck of a game on senior night. Murray State versus St. Mary's, largest crowd in CFSB history. Watched Isaiah Cannon and what's the guy who went to St. Mary's?
Matthew Dellavedova.
Matthew Dellavedova. He had an injury, had an ankle injury, and that was a problem. But really, just a fantastic game. One of the better games
Two NBA players in that game. You don't
Absolutely.
have very many games at Murray State where you've got two NBA players.
Right.
playing.
Well, the funny thing about that is, during that stretch, you had Robert Covington at Tennessee State as well.
That's true.
So that stretch had a lot of talent in there. But this game, St. Mary's game, was one of the greatest games in Murray State history, in my opinion, just because it was on the national stage.
Two ranked teams on ESPN.
Yep.
Dick Vitale was there.
Yep.
The arena was full 2 hours before game time.
Absolutely.
People stood in lines that stretched a quarter of a mile
out
to
of
get
each
into the
door,
arena.
not out of one door,
right?
Out of each entryway. There were people camped outside. Students had camped. I remember Coach Prum going through and ordering pizza and delivering it to the people camped out in front. And the game didn't disappoint. I mean, it was a great game. Now, mind you, it wasn't a nail biter. It wasn't, really all that close. But St. Mary never went away, to their credit. A very good team, well-coached, well-played team. They just never could get over the hump against Murray State, and the crowd had a lot to do with that. There were measurements taken during that game that said that prolonged exposure would have caused hearing damage. That's how loud it was. It was the loudest indoor sports event ever measured, according to the study that I read. And it's, it's a testament to how passionate the Murray State fans can be. And a great game, well played, and the highlight of the game was less the win, although that was really nice, but that it was senior night.
I'm going to mention one that a lot of people who are listening will not remember. 1977, January of 1977. Murray State at Western Kentucky.
Okay.
All right? Very end of the game. It's tied 87-87. Jump ball. And back then,
those were real jump balls.
they were real jump balls, and they had them at the free throw line.
Yep.
So Murray State and Western are contesting a jump ball with almost no time left on the clock at Murray State's free throw line with the score tied. And John Randall goes to the ref and he says, "Can I just tip it in?" And the ref says, "Sure." So John Randall on the jump ball just goes up and taps it into the basket.
Now,
2
was
points.
he jumping against a guard or something? I don't know.
I don't recall who he was jumping
Okay.
against. But he just goes up, taps it into the basket, Racers win.
Oh, what a fantastic way!
I was listening to
That's
that
awesome.
on the radio in the car. I'd been on a date with Marilyn, who's now my wife. We were listening to that game when it happened, and I was like, "Oh my goodness!"
What a great turn on that one. That's one of those that you look at and you go, "That's how you end a game." And you look at those teams from the 70s, and there's a lot of low points through there, but there are some really, really high points in the 1970s as well for Racer basketball. And honestly, wins at Western, they're just great. It doesn't matter what you win.
Anytime you win at Western, it's great. In the first season that Ron Green had at Murray State, he won 4 games and lost 22, but he was 2-0 against Western. So
on some level,
okay.
it was a successful year.
Absolutely.
I mean, on some level. Now,
what you got next?
Okay, mine is actually a 2-game span that happened, and they all kind of center around former Racer player and now current Racer assistant coach Aubrey Reese. And for people in Cape Girardeau, the name Aubrey Reese can cause them to go into fits. So Aubrey Reese was OVC Player of the Year in 2000, was part of a stretch of players from Alabama that were among the greatest racers of all time. And he comes in an undersized point guard, but really a do-everything guard. I mean, he scored. He could pass. He could shoot. He did everything. And in 2 games versus Southeast Missouri, who were the number 2 team in the conference that year with Bud Ely, the 6'11 center who later had a cup of coffee in the NBA, Aubrey Reese, in tight games, led the Racers to victories. Unto itself, that's not all that impressive, except the second time it was in the OVC Championship and caused one of the greatest radio calls in the history of Racer basketball. He did it again. On a leaner in the lane with almost no time left, over the extended arm of 6'11 Bud Ely, Aubrey Reese knocked down a shot that should have been impossible. And he nailed it. He hit it. Murray State went to the NCAA tournament, won the OVC championship. One of the greatest plays ever. And the thing is, he did it twice. So you knew on the SEMO sideline, they're going, don't let Reese beat us.
And on the Murray State sideline, they started with Coach Anderson saying, okay, they're going to expect us to give it to Aubrey, so we're not going to do that. And Aubrey said, Give me the ball. I'll
know
get
what?
it for you.
To quote two different sports movies, the first being Hoosiers, I'll make it. Jimmy Chitwood, I'll make it. Aubrey Reese said that in The Replacements, winners always want the ball. When the game's on the line, winners always want the ball. I want the ball. That is a testament to the player that Aubrey Reese is, that he could go through and do that.
And I hadn't planned on doing this.
Oh, no.
But you just reminded me of something.
Okay.
I was playing in a pickup game
Oh,
at Car Health.
do you do your own play-by-play?
With a bunch of the lady racers. And anyway, in this game, I wasn't shooting the ball because there
Why
were some
would
of the
you?
lady
Yeah.
racers on my team. I was throwing the ball to them. So anyway,
Which is unusual if you've ever played ball with Will.
final play of the game, I dribble down to the top of the key, and they're not guarding me because I haven't shot it all game. So I get to the top of the key, I shoot it, and I turn and walk out the door while the ball's in the air. So,
Wait, did it go in?
of course.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you J.R. Smith that or not. I didn't know. I didn't know if you just walked off.
Anyway, clearly that doesn't belong on the list. But you reminded me of it. Winners want the ball.
Winners want the ball.
Anyway, the next one that I'm going to mention probably would not be mentioned by anyone else, but only because they're misguided. Murray State 58-41 over Colorado State, 2012, the NCAA tournament. Hey, we've got 2 NCAA tournament victories. You can't leave that game out of a list like this. Even though we won it by 17 points, even though we were expected to win, you can't leave that out.
You know, and I was at that game, and it was one of the highlights of following the team as well is that feeling of walking into an NCAA tournament game expecting to win. That was an unusual feeling for a lot of us racer fans at the time.
Right.
You know, we kind of went into NCAA games or games against, the big money schools. Those are games you go, you know what, I think we can win. We got the talent. We got to have some, breaks fall our way. We can beat this team. But in that game against Colorado State, I believe Larry Eustace was the coach for Colorado State that year. And a pretty good Colorado State team. I mean, they weren't bad. They were an 11 seed. Is that correct? Was it a 6-11?
We were 6 seeds, so yeah.
And, they come in, and the game starts off, and it's a typical postseason game. It's played physically. It's tough. It's low scoring. Shooting wasn't great on either side because the depth is a little off whenever you're in those, different arenas than what you're used to. And I just watched the racers just did exactly what they were supposed to do. They went through and played their game. They did what they and all the talk the whole season is, have the racers ever been tested? Did they do anything? I mean, I know they beat Memphis at Memphis, but what have they done since then? They lost to Tennessee State at home, blah 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 blah. And then you watch them, and they go against Colorado State, and just it was a physical beatdown.
And you mentioned the Memphis game that year. That ought to be on this list too, because that game is what propelled that team to where they wound up in the rankings and where they wound up as far as seedings were concerned. And it was a bizarre game that we had down there. I remember when they were introducing the starting lineups, and Calipari had been at UK for like 2 years by that point.
Yeah.
They were introducing the starting lineups. Josh Pastner was the coach at Memphis.
Now at Georgia Tech.
And they go, and the coach of the Tigers, John Calipari.
And everybody kind of stops, and some people booed, and
It was bizarre. And then, they really did not treat us very well. Wound up not having any place to have the post-game press conference. We were in a hallway, and we gave them what for, though. We beat them.
well, I was at that game as well, and the only tickets available were in the uppermost portion of the upper deck. It was so high, I saw people getting nosebleeds, and the ushers were Sherpas. It was way up. I saw on top of the Jumbotron scoreboard, and I was watching the game by leaning over and trying to watch stuff because you'd lose them under the Jumbotron. And I'll tell you, it was one of the greatest experiences I ever had. You know, I'm surrounded by a bunch of Memphis fans, and not only do we come out and play well to start, Dante Poole's coming out party in a lot of ways. I mean, that young man had a great game that night. It seemed like everything we did was in fluid motion, was just perfectly executed. They did their best to isolate, Isaiah Cannon, try to keep him from doing things. But then you watch a guy like Ivan Aska hit a three from the top of the key. When did Ivan ever do that? And all of a sudden you go, oh, that guy can shoot too? All right.
At the beginning of the year, it was funny. I was standing with Coach Prohm and Lindy Suter, buddy of mine. And so we were talking, and of course they had lost a lot of guys from the previous year, and it was Coach Prohm's first year. And Lindy said, look, all you got to do is, win all your games coming into the Memphis game and then beat Memphis, and you'll be ranked. That's all you got to do. And as it turned out, that's exactly what they did do. Wound up being the last undefeated team in the nation. And when Syracuse lost, making Murray State the last undefeated team in the nation, they came on the intercom at Kroger and announced that Syracuse had lost. I mean, that was pretty cool. What's your next great game?
Okay. God, there's so many things we could talk about from that season that I could go on forever. All right. 1991 NCAA tournament, first round game, Murray State versus Michigan State, the game that almost was. Murray State comes in as a 16 seed after having a really poor out-of-conference schedule to start. They didn't play very well early on. Once they got into conference, they really turned it around. They found where they needed to play, some really unheralded players in that team, but the one guy everybody knows, Popeye Jones. Popeye Jones, 6'8" young man out of Dresden, Tennessee, comes to Murray State, gets himself healthy, and becomes a racer legend. Scores 38 points against Michigan State, the one seed Michigan State, in the NCAA tournament in the Knoxville Regional, and one of the greatest performances by a racer of all time. But just fantastic play, and it did it against bigger guys. Did it against guys who were more heralded as recruits. Just a kind of a sign of things to come from Popeye as he went on to have a very nice career in the NBA as a five who not gonna jump out of the building. Not going to do all the things that you would look for out of a lot of NBA.
In that game, he tortured them with threes from the top
he
of the
did,
key.
And he looked so good doing the little jump hooks that he had, baseline hook shots, the softest hands of a big man of his generation. I think that's. I mean, he could do things with the ball on the box that shouldn't have been possible against a guy who's 7'1", and that's who he was going up against. Was a 7'1" kid from Michigan State, and here he is 6'8", and he's just.
Shout out to Mark Hart. He did color for Murray State basketball back then, along with Randy Herndon, who was doing play-by-play. Mark called Popeye the Racer Man. I thought it was a great nickname.
One of the greatest games. The thing that everybody needs to remember from that is Murray State was a 16 seed. Michigan State was a 1 seed out of the Big Ten. And Murray State took Michigan State into overtime. Now, at the time, it wasn't much ballyhooed because we didn't know then that a 16 would not have beaten a 1 all the way to here. I mean,
right.
It had just expanded to where there were 16 seeds in each pod. I say just, maybe a couple years before. And nobody really knew how rare that would be. And even now, I mean, we look at it, a 16's never beaten one in the NCAA tournament. And if those teams get within 10 points, generally that is a big story. But to see a Murray State team be the team that takes a number 1 to overtime and really just ran out of gas. I mean, that game is on YouTube. You can watch it. And I recommend it's fantastic to watch, but they just ran out of gas.
December 4, 2004. The Lady Racers at Arkansas Little Rock. With a minute and 30 seconds left. Murray State is down 12. I'm doing the game. And I didn't think we had a chance. Down 12. Well, in the last minute and a half, Ashley Brooke Hayes hits 3 3-pointers. And there at the buzzer, in transition, Jill Fulkerson nails a jump shot from the corner, which I thought was a 3, and they only gave her 2. But it was enough to win the basketball game. And it was the most amazing comeback that I've ever seen.
You know, and
well, it was the most amazing comeback I had ever seen. Till Texas A&M did it with like 47 seconds left. They came from 12 down.
Oh yeah, that's one of those that you watch games like that, and I hear a lot of people ask the question at the end of games whenever it's a double-digit lead. Why are they fouling? Why are they doing this? Why are they playing this way? God, don't they know that they're down 12, 15 points? Don't they know there's only 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes to go? They're not going to come back. Why do they do that? And the answer is because sometimes it happens.
Yeah, sometimes
it happens. Now, is it all the time? No, it's not all the time. It's not even most of the time. But if you're playing to win the game, and the only way there is to win it is to take the bet on the 1% chance, then that's what you do.
That's right.
And if you execute perfectly, then you can go in and steal a win. And that is a sign of great coaching and great players and knowing exactly what needs to be done and having the wherewithal to realize it in the moment. You know, hey, look, we just need to stay calm and execute. We don't have to do anything. You know, this is stuff we've done before. It's all brand new. You know?
Jill told me, and I think I can say this because she put it on Facebook. She said, Toomby Bell was an assistant coach under Joy Williams at the time.
Right. And
she said, when I hit that shot, I came over to the sideline. Toomby hugged me so hard I peed my pants.
You know, you can't be mad about that, though. You got to kind of go through and say, yeah, that'll work. Oh, man, what a great game. And that reminds me of... It reminds me of the game on my list next in a lot of different ways. February 14th, 2015. It is Valentine's Day in the Show Me Center, which, quite honestly, if you're going to have a Valentine's Day outside of Murray, that's about as good a place as any here recently.
They used to call it Racer Arena North.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, it looked to be something of a similar setup. Murray State was going, if they could win the game and some things fell right, they could clinch the OVC championship, the regular season title. SEMO came in not having a great season, but had a lot of talent. And Murray State was coming into play. And anytime Murray State goes into the place, you know that the team that's playing them raises their game. It just happens every time. The Murray State on the front of the shirt is a target, especially when we're playing well. So cut to the 2015, and Cameron Payne, TJ Sapp, Jarvis Williams, you know, you've got John Farrell, you got these guys who are really just great players, one of the greatest teams of all time. This is they're on a streak of wins. They're in the top 25 talks at this point. People are like, hey, this team's pretty good. They're doing some things. After some rough losses early in the season where the chemistry wasn't right, or they didn't have the roles defined, they go into the Show Me Center, and for 27 minutes and 40 seconds, they trail. And I mean bad. At parts it looks horrible, like nasty, ugly, can't stop SEMO from scoring, can't get out of our own way on offense, just horrible. And then all of a sudden, it gets to the end of the game, and the Racers are coming back. They're chipping away at it, chipping away. And finally, they get just so close. They're 3 points down. TJ Sapp has the ball. He's going to try to pull up and take a three. What's the one thing you don't do if you're defending a guy who needs a three to tie it? You don't foul. Don't foul. SEMO didn't apparently miss that day in basketball camp because they foul TJ Sapp. He goes to the free throw line, hits 3 free throws, sends the game to overtime. Now, at that point, it's not out of the woods yet. Cameron Payne fouls out, star player of the team, fouls out. Now all of a sudden you start going, oh man, this is going to get rough. John Farrell, Jarvis Williams, they get into foul trouble. In comes Wayne Langston. Now, up to this point, Wayne had been a role player who had done he pretty good, showed some glimpses of the talent that he had, but was not going to push John and Jarvis out of the starting lineup that year. He comes into that game, and all of a sudden, the star that is Wayne Langston starts to emerge. He hits a couple shots, plays some really incredible defense, and the Racers win the game and the OVC championship in overtime, 94-92 at SEMO. It was incredible. I mean, it was one of those that you watch the game and 7.9 seconds left in the game. Up until that point, I was like, you know what? Murray State's fought really hard. I don't think they're going to come out with this game. Winning on the road's tough. I was just thinking, winning on the road's tough. And instead, Murray State comes out with a victory and they claim the regular season OVC championship. And that's a very important thing that have happened because they later would fall on a prayer 3 to Belmont. And instead of not being invited, they got to go to the NIT and had that great NIT run that year. But a fantastic game.
2002. Tavester Anderson leads Murray State into Louisville for the OVC tournament. They play Tennessee Tech, and this is at the International Convention Center downtown. And it's not a basketball facility, but I thought they did a great job of making it into one for that tournament. Anyway, Justin Burdine's leading the Racers. And
he's from Louisville, right? Justin Burdine was?
No.
No? Who was the young man? Sorry, go ahead.
Chris Shoemate was from Louisville.
Shoemate was from Louisville.
But anyway, so Justin is the Racers' best player. He winds up hitting a runner with like 6 seconds to go to win the game for Murray State, send them to the NCAA tournament, and then Justin runs over after the game, jumps up on the press table and does a Superman pose. And while he's doing that, I can see Coach T across the way pumping his fist like that. You know, kudos too, though, to Antoine Welchel, because Welchel got the stop on the very last play of the game to keep Tech from being able to come back and force overtime or anything like that. But that was a great game, and it led to a great beginning of a game against Georgia
Absolutely.
At the United Center in Chicago, where Murray State got off to a 24-point lead, only to have that vanish.
Yeah, so my next game, Murray State versus Vanderbilt, NCAA tournament. Everybody knows that game. Everybody knows De Niro Thomas's shot. That's almost cliche.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's one of those that everybody knows it. I don't even think I need to go into it at this point. There have been books written about it. I mean, wow. You know? What we don't often talk about is 2 shots that happened during that season. One versus EKU by B.J. Jenkins, and one versus Austin Peay by Isaac Miles. Now, that team was one of those chemistry-based teams that you look at and you go, well, you know, all these guys are pretty good. I don't really see a star. You know, what's their thing? And then you watch them play and you go, well, they don't need a star. They're sacrificing their ability to be a star for the betterment of the team. I mean,
there's truth in that.
Yeah.
The star was Isaiah Cannon, and
the freshman who didn't start and only played, 12 or 13 minutes a game, but they were the most exciting 12 or 13 minutes a game.
He averaged like 10 points a game.
Absolutely, yeah. And a guy who didn't start.
And I remember I asked Isaiah that year, I said, who's faster, you or Isaac Miles? And he said, I am, and he knows it.
And you watch that's one of those that really you go into those games and you watch them and you see just what those games mean. At the time, you're like, okay, these are important. They're conference games. You want to win these games. You want to do well. We were having a very good season up to that point. But then you get the 12 seed versus Vanderbilt,
Yeah.
And then you look back at those games.
Now,
Those are the ones that get you to that point.
That was Murray State's second victory in the NCAA tournament. When we were talking about the Colorado State game, I mentioned that we had only had 2 NCAA tournament victories up to the Colorado State
up to that
game.
point.
Okay. The first one was 1988, North Carolina State. And that was a game the Racers were not supposed to win.
Absolutely not.
It was not supposed to be close. And Murray State pulls off the huge upset on national TV in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Absolutely. And the game is as much known for the sound bites that came after it. You never want to play a state that's not a state.
Yeah.
That's Jim Valvano said that when talking about Murray State. You never want to play a state that's not a state. The M&M boys from Murray State, which, 2 of the greatest players that have ever played at Murray State. And the fact that they played together, Don Mann, Jeff Martin. Jeff Martin still, correct me if I'm wrong, the all-time Division I scoring leader in the state of Kentucky.
Yes.
So Louisville's got nothing on him. Kentucky's got nothing on him. Eastern, Western, Moorhead, anybody else that wants to show up. That man, he was a star. 6'8" guy out of Arkansas, a little town in Arkansas, comes in and he plays a stretch forward position, really ahead of his time.
Right.
That position has really blossomed now. It's normal. In fact, you find 6'8" guys playing on the perimeter all the time. But then you watch him do it and you go, well, that's weird. How did that ever happen? Just a fantastic player. Great game. Later went on to lose to Kansas in the second round, who Danny Manning and the Miracles went on to win the national championship. But a fantastic team for Murray State.
You got any other games?
There are so many other games that I can't name just one, so we'll let that go for right now.
Okay. I believe you wanted to talk about the switch to an 18-game conference schedule.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of I think it's been met with questioning to positive reviews from the people that I've noticed online. I think I have some concerns with it. Yes, you are taking the need to schedule 2 more games off people's plates, and I get that. Those are 2 more Division I games, but for all the bad that Division II and NAIA games give you, and they do, one of the best,
let's be clear.
Yeah.
We won't have fewer NAIA games.
No.
The people who are thinking that don't understand how college athletics work.
The thing that hurts you is that those NAIA games don't affect your RPI. They don't affect any of that stuff. They're just free games you can play. They're glorified exhibitions. And teams aren't going to stop scheduling those teams because, frankly, it's much cheaper to get those teams than it is to get a Division I team to come down there. It's just cheaper. And for those cash-strapped teams at the bottom of the OVC that we all look at and say, well, those guys need to schedule better, what they're going to do is now they've got at least one or more home games they've already got settled in. They're going to go take another bye game versus another team and get shellacked.
Yeah.
They're
not canceling an NAIA game because they make money on those games.
Absolutely.
So that's
they cost
that's not going to happen.
They cost
Now,
$50,000 to schedule.
Here's my concern. I have come across what to me is a bizarre notion of how the schedule should be arranged. I saw it discussed with regard to the Missouri Valley Conference. I've seen it discussed with regard to other conferences, including the OVC, with the OVC going to no divisions and an 18-game schedule. And that is that you power match it with the teams at the top playing more games against the teams at the top and the teams at the bottom playing more games against the teams at the bottom. That's crazy.
It's crazy until you look at it from this perspective. If you've got 3 teams that are knocking on the RPI top 100, and then you've got the rest of the teams in your conference who are 200 plus RPI teams, playing those teams is a no-win situation. You cannot gain anything.
But the RPI doesn't matter. The NCAA has made that clear.
And this is the problem with all scheduling initiatives right now, because there is no logical rhyme or reason to how things are going. When the RPI first came out and was going to be used as part of the selection process, the Missouri Valley Conference, in a moment of genius, hired people to figure out what's the best way for us to crack the RPI code.
And they did.
And they did.
And for a couple of years, they got multiple teams into the tournament. One year, they got 4.
Right.
And then the NCAA said,
well, the RPI is an imperfect system.
Not happening anymore.
Right. They'd rather give it to 500 teams in the ACC or the Big Ten.
Illinois State was number 33 in the RPI this last year. They did not get an NCAA tournament bid when teams in the 50s and 60s did. The RPI only matters when the NCAA wants to use it as an excuse for why they're doing something.
Here's the thing that does matter.
Okay.
The RPI continues to be a talking point in the media, and the NCAA is nothing if not sensitive to media criticism. If you have a way, one of the big things that Murray State has done well in their time, even though they haven't gotten an at-large bid when they probably deserved it, at least once, one of the things that they've done really well is they've scheduled in such a way and won games that made them a talking point in the national media. The NIT team that lost on the Prayer 3 to Belmont, went on to the NIT but didn't go to the NCAA tournament. That was a team that was in the coaches and press top 25 in the nation. They were not one of the 30 best teams not to make the tournament. That is incongruous to what... If you're asking
they were
coaches,
a 4 seed in the NIT.
If you're asking the coaches and the coaches say, no, they're one of the top 25 best teams in the country, and then you ask the press, they're one of the top 25 teams in the country, and then you go to the selection committee and they say, no, they're closer to 40, you've got a problem. There's a problem there. And I want to, for all the faults that sports media has, that's one of the things that they love to harp on.
Problem.
That doesn't make any sense.
Here's the problem with power matching the schedule.
Yeah.
The teams that are, say, 6th, 7th, et cetera, play a weaker schedule than the teams that you expect to be at the top. And as a result, you might have one of those teams at 6 or 7 bump up and maybe win the league in a given year or finish second. And, then your conference champion is somebody who got there by playing a weak schedule.
Absolutely, and that's something that you have to take into account as well with that. And I think that's one of the negatives on that one is that you're too reliant on the tournament shaking things back out into a normal run. It actually could influence things positively for mediocre teams as opposed to your best teams.
Right.
I think the scheduling part that I recall the OVC doing for a short time was limiting the number of pay games that teams could take. Now, there was some pushback because of financial reasons. Unfortunately, a lot of the teams in the OVC just don't have the resources to do that at the Division I level.
Well, when Mick Cronin was here, he told me that, and I know other schools have done this, that the people at Murray State said, hey, if you want to schedule another bye game and just take the money for yourself, we're okay with that.
Right.
But Mick said, I'm not going to do that. That undermines the program.
Right. And a lot of that was as an attempt to, whenever you have limited resources, you have to get creative in the way that you compensate and the way that you run the program inside the rules. And bye games are a big example of that. You can play games on the road and go and go and play teams in the top 5 and knowing that you don't really have a chance to win those games, knowing that, in fact, you shouldn't win those games. Otherwise, it's going to be harder for you to get those games in the future. I think that's one of the issues that happened after the Memphis game was that was supposed to be a bye game. Memphis was buying an RPI top 100 win is what they were paying for. And instead, they got an RPI top 100 loss. And that hurt them. That hurt Memphis that year. So it's one of those, there's a system in place now where the incentives are all in keeping the lower teams low and the upper teams high. And as long as that system is still in place, then you're going to have situations where you have to get creative with your scheduling. You have to figure out, hey, can we play this game? Can we schedule a game? Can we get a team to come here? Can we go 2 for 1, 3 for 1, 4-for-1, 3-for-1 with a neutral, or something like that. Which is, Austin Peay has done that at times against Tennessee. You've just got to figure out where you can do that, and the best teams will figure out a way to do that.
Anything else?
Lots of stuff going on. Some possible transfer targets for Murray State for that final slot, but nothing hard yet. The schedule is still in the works. I really think that the talk of the Missouri Valley Conference slowed that down quite a bit. So we'll probably have a schedule here in the next couple months, and we can talk about it then. But as of right now, no news. So
that brings to a close this edition of the Improbability Engine.